October 21st, 1964. The red carpet outside the Odeon Leicester Square was the most glamorous stretch of pavement in the world that night. Floodlights turned the London evening into a blinding white noon. Photographers lined both sides 3 rows deep, every one of them screaming a single name. Flashbulbs fired like artillery, and behind the velvet rope, hundreds of ordinary Londoners pressed forward, holding handmade signs above their heads. This was the world premiere of My Fair Lady, the biggest film of the year, perhaps the biggest film of the decade. Nobody in that crowd was thinking about what was about to happen. Nobody was watching the little girl in the far corner, the one in the wheelchair, the one with the oxygen tube beneath her nose, holding a handwritten sign with letters so large and so desperate that her mother had helped her draw them the night before in a hospital room. Nobody, that is, except Audrey Hepburn. The car door opened, and the crowd lost its mind. Before we go further, if stories like this move you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. What happened next will stay with you. But we need to go back, because this story did not begin on a red carpet. It began 6 months earlier in a small terraced house in Bermondsey, South London, where a man named Robert Bennett sat at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, staring at a stack of papers he could not afford to pay. Robert was 34 years old. He worked the assembly line at a factory in Rotherhithe, 6 days a week. His wife Helen worked mornings at a hotel, changing beds, scrubbing bathrooms, smiling at guests who never learned her name. They had one daughter, Clara, 8 years old, brown eyes, a laugh so loud it made the windows rattle. Clara had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia in February of that year. Stage 3. The consultants at Great Ormond Street Hospital used words like aggressive and we are doing everything we can. And what those words really meant was this: the treatment was not working, and every passing week cost more than Robert and Helen earned in a month, and the girl with the gap-toothed smile was growing thinner and quieter and further away. Clara had one obsession during those months: not toys, not comics, Audrey Hepburn. It had started the previous Christmas when Helen took her to see Roman Holiday. Clara had sat completely still for the entire film, extraordinary for a child who could never sit still. And when it ended, she turned to her mother with tears on her face. "Mummy, she's magic." From that day, Clara's hospital room became a shrine. Photographs clipped from magazines, a poster of Sabrina, a drawing she had made herself. Nurse Dorothy Shaw, who had worked the children's ward for 11 years, had never seen anything like Clara's quiet, concentrated devotion. "She doesn't just like her," Dorothy told a colleague one evening. "She believes in her, like she's a real person who actually knows her." By late summer, Clara had been given 3 to 4 months. The experimental protocol had not produced the results they needed. The remaining options were expensive and logistically impossible for a family already stretched past breaking point. Then something happened that nobody planned. In late September, Robert was doing a cash-in-hand cleaning shift at a building in Mayfair. He was on his knees scrubbing a brass door fitting when he heard footsteps stop beside him. He did not look up. He had learned long ago that people in that part of London preferred not to be looked at by people like him. But a voice, quiet, accented, unhurried, said, "Are you all right?" He looked up. He recognized her immediately. Anyone would have. She was not dressed for a premiere. She wore a simple coat, her hair loose, a paper bag of groceries under one arm. She looked like a woman who had stepped out to buy milk. But those eyes, the eyes that half the world had fallen in love with on a cinema screen, held something he had not expected. She was genuinely asking. Robert did not know why he told her everything. He was not a man who talked to strangers. He was not a man who cried in front of people. But something in the way she stood there, patient and completely present, dissolved the wall he had spent months building around the worst thing in his life. He told her about Clara, about the leukemia, about the letters from the billing department he kept in a drawer because he could not bring himself to open them, about the way his daughter said goodnight every evening to her Audrey Hepburn poster, as though she were saying goodnight to someone she trusted. Audrey stood on that Mayfair pavement and listened the way people listen when something has touched a nerve that runs all the way to the bottom of them. Because it had. What Robert could not have known was what she looked like in the winter of 1944. 90 pounds, 17 years old. Eating tulip bulbs because there was nothing else. Watching children in the streets of Arnhem sit down in the road and simply stop moving. She had survived that winter. Many had not. She had carried that knowledge for 20 years, through every premiere, every award, every beautiful dress, like a stone in the center of her chest that never warmed up. When Robert described his daughter, Audrey did not see someone else's tragedy. She saw 1944. She saw every child who had not made it. She asked for the name of the hospital. She asked for Clara's name. Then she said, "I would like to come and visit, if that would be all right." Robert stared at her. "She'd never recover," he said finally. "She'd think she was dreaming." Audrey smiled. "Then we won't tell her in advance." 3 days later, a woman walked into the children's ward at Great Ormond Street without a press team, a publicist, or a photographer. Nurse Dorothy Shaw recognized her and had to grip the nursing station to keep herself upright. Audrey shook Dorothy's hand and said, "Please don't make a fuss. This is just a visit." Clara was sitting up in bed, staring at the poster on the wall, when a voice said very softly, "Hello, Clara." She turned, and for a moment she did not react at all. Her brain could not process what her eyes were telling her. Then she made a sound that Dorothy would describe years later as the sound of a child experiencing something too large for her body to contain. They spent 2 hours together. Audrey sat on the edge of the bed and talked to Clara as though her opinions mattered, as though she was a full person worth knowing. She told her things about the films that nobody knew. She listened to Clara's answers with complete attention. When Clara fell asleep mid-sentence, Audrey tucked the blanket around her shoulders and sat a while longer without moving. Before she left, she spoke quietly to Dorothy. She asked about the experimental treatment. She asked what it would cost. She said, "I would like to handle this quietly. No names attached, no press. Just make sure it gets done." Dorothy looked at her. "Why?" It was a real question, not a rude one. Audrey paused. "Because I ate grass once," she said, "and I know what it means when someone stops." Nobody was told. Robert and Helen received a letter informing them that an anonymous benefactor had arranged full funding for the Swiss specialist and the experimental protocol. They spent weeks trying to find out who it was. They never officially confirmed it. But Helen had seen the way Audrey looked back at Clara sleeping, and she knew. She had always known. By November, Clara was in a private clinic in Zurich. The treatment was brutal. 3 more months of worse before better. But in the first week of the new year, the markers moved in the direction they were supposed to move. The consultant walked in with a different expression. He said the word Robert and Helen had been afraid to even think. Remission. 2 weeks after that phone call, the premiere of My Fair Lady was announced. London, Leicester Square, October 21st. And Clara Bennett, 9 years old, still thin, still marked by what her body had been through, trailing an oxygen line but standing on her own feet for 20 minutes at a time, turned to her mother and said, "I want to go." Helen looked at her daughter's face. She did not say no. They made the sign together the night before. Clara directed, Helen drew. The letters were large and black and said, "Audrey, you saved my life. I am here." October 21st. The black car at the curb, the photographers, the crowd. Audrey Hepburn stepping out in a pale gold Givenchy gown and long white satin gloves. The most photographed woman in the world on the most celebrated night of her career. The crowd was screaming. Her publicist was steering her toward the cameras. Everything was exactly as planned. She stopped. She had seen the sign. The publicist touched her arm. "Audrey, the photographers?" Audrey was not listening. She moved away from the cameras, along the barrier, against the current of every protocol that governed these events, toward the far corner where a girl in a wheelchair was holding a sign with 2 shaking hands. Security followed. Paramount executives looked at each other in confusion. The photographers swung their lenses, not knowing where to aim. Audrey reached the barrier. She reached across it. She took Clara's face in both white-gloved hands and looked at her the way she had looked at her in the hospital room 14 months before, completely without reservation, as though nothing else in the world required her attention. Clara was crying too hard to speak. "I know," Audrey said quietly. "I know, sweetheart." She turned to the security guard. Can we bring her through? They brought Clara through, right onto the red carpet, right into the light. And Audrey Hepburn, in her pale gold gown, knelt down on the carpet beside the wheelchair, not caring about the dress, not caring about the cameras, and pulled off one of her long white satin gloves. She placed it in Clara's lap. This is yours, she said. You keep it. Then she leaned close to Clara's ear and said something that only Clara could hear. Clara closed her eyes, nodded once, held the glove against her chest. The crowd had gone completely silent. You could hear the wind moving down Leicester Square. Then someone began to clap, and then everyone was clapping. And then it was something larger than clapping, a sound that moved through thousands of people like a wave, because everyone understood, even those at the back who could barely see, that they were witnessing something that had nothing to do with film premieres. Nobody heard what Audrey whispered. Nobody would ever fully know. But years later, when Dr. Clara Bennett, consultant pediatric oncologist at Great Ormond Street Hospital, specializing in treatment access for families who cannot afford private care, was asked what had kept her going through the hardest years of her training, she paused for a long time. Then she said, "Someone told me when I was 9 and very sick and frightened that the people who have been through the worst things have a responsibility to come back and make it mean something." She said it quietly, as though it were obvious. I never forgot it. In the waiting room of Dr. Bennett's clinic, there is a photograph on the wall. A woman in a pale gold gown, kneeling on a red carpet, face to face with a small girl in a wheelchair. Both of them looking at each other with such complete attention that everything else in the frame, the floodlights, the crowd, the cameras, seems to belong to a different world. The caption says nothing about cinema. It says only this: she stopped. That was everything. On Dr. Bennett's desk, in a glass case, there is a single white satin glove. Have you ever had someone stop everything, the noise, the schedule, the importance of their own life, just to truly see you? Tell me in the comments. Because that is what Audrey Hepburn understood, not from a script or a director's instruction, but from a winter in 1944 when she was a child, and the world kept moving around the people who were dying. She decided somewhere in that hunger and that cold that she would never do the same. She never did.